40 Days to Die. The Secret Wives Who Faked Their Deaths. In our lineage, when a husband ascends to the great deep, the surviving wife has exactly 40 solar cycles to follow him into the great deep. They call it the Vow of Aetheria because the elders decree men require navigators even after their final voyage. I watched my Aunt Fira drink the ceremonial nightingale draught at her late husband's consecration while his mother, the Matriarch, held her wrists steady, making sure every drop went down. My mother, Sarah, counts Dad's, Senator Tiber's, silver hairs like she's calculating how many solar cycles she has left. When I was 15, Dad had a cardiac incident and survived. That's when Mom started waking me at 03 to teach me how to replicate sigils and which coastal prefectures are easiest to vanish in. In our lineage, when a husband descends, the surviving wife has exactly 40 solar cycles to follow him into the great deep. They called it the Vow of Aetheria because apparently men needed navigators even after their final voyage. I watched my Aunt Fira drink the ceremonial draught at her late husband's 40th day memorial when her hands shook as she raised the chalice, but the matriarch held her wrists steady, making sure every drop went down. Aunt Lissa was 23. She tried to flee on cycle 38, made it all the way to the docks before Elder Orion's brothers dragged her back. I remember her pleading, saying she was carrying. They said the child could navigate Elder Orion too. My mother, Sarah, would braid my hair every evening and tell me how romantic it was that wives cherished their consorts so deeply they couldn't bear life without them. But I saw the way her hands quivered whenever Dad got a seasonal flux. I saw her counting his silver hairs like she was calculating how many solar cycles she had left. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at the carving knives, not in an aggressive way, but like she was gauging which would be keenest in 20 cycles. The truth about this custom was, it wasn't even that ancient. My great-great-grandfather started it after his brother's widow remarried someone younger and wealthier. He claimed it was about consort loyalty, but everyone knew it was about estate control. Deceased wives can't inherit coastal property. Deceased wives can't remarry. Deceased wives can't testify about their consort's actions. Deceased wives can't reveal the lash marks hidden beneath their burial linens. The consecration rites were always identical. Cycle 40 would arrive and the entire clan would gather. The widow would wear pearl-white silk, her consort's favored garment. She'd serve spiced sea tea to his kinsman one final time. Then they'd bring out the chalice, always obsidian, always inlaid with etched sea serpents. The draught smelled like salt and citrus. They'd make her consume it in front of everyone, then lay her next to her consort's portrait until her breathing ceased. Typically, it took about 20 minutes. The younger children were meant to observe to learn about clan duty. When I was 15, Dad had a cardiac incident that he survived, but it changed everything. Mom started acting differently. She'd rouse me at 03 for lessons. First, she taught me how to reproduce sigils, making me practice Dad's name until I could do it flawlessly. Then came the Chronos transactions, how to move funds without triggering alerts, how to conceal assets under different aliases. She showed me web archives for synthetic data tabs, taught me which prefectures were easiest to disappear in, made me memorize maritime routes to the southern archipelago, just in case you ever need to vanish, she'd say. But we both knew who really needed to vanish. Then she showed me the vid logs. She'd been compiling them for cycles. Grainy footage of consecration rites from old family gatherings. She had them hidden on an encrypted data slab labeled Harvest Records. She'd pause at certain moments. Look at Aunt Fira's chalice. See how it differs from Aunt Lissa's? She'd say. Look at Aunt Lou's passage. Notice how the funerary litter is so light when they carry it. Look at how her sister keeps checking her chronometer during the burial. That's when I learned about the shadow network. For 20 cycles, widows had been feigning their ascensions. Some used rare compounds that slowed their pulse to nil for 48 hours. One aunt was an apothecary who'd been acquiring them from the clinic for cycles. Others had physician allies who falsified death reports for Chronos. There was a whole underground current of safe havens in other territories where departed women began new existences. They had new aliases, new citizen ID codes, new everything. Mom taught me the cipher phrases at clan gatherings. Such a tranquil tide meant the widow escaped successfully. She battled the tempest meant someone was suspicious. Beautiful etching meant they needed help with documents. The sea serpent was perfect meant they needed funds. She's navigating now meant she didn't make it out. I started assisting when I was 17, creating synthetic data tabs in my academy's computer lab using the census equipment. Master Avari thought I was just incredibly dedicated to holographic design. I generated 12 new identities that cycle. Each one had a full chronology, where they attended academy, their first trade, their preferred nutrient paste flavor. I got skilled at aging portraits, making young women look older, altering hair pigments, adjusting facial contours just enough. We saved cousin Jessa when her consort passed from a lung ailment. She died of grief, but actually took a transport skiff to Viridian with Kappa 50,000 Kronos and a new alias. We saved Elder Kale's wife by switching her drought chalice with one full of soporifics. She woke in the central wastes. Not everyone succeeded. Aunt Lyra's matriarch caught her packing. They made her consume 2 chalices. Everything went south when Elder Magistrate Orion died. His wife Zelie was only 19 and she was carrying. Elder Orion had been 67, his 4th wife. The preceding 3 had all followed him into the great deep within their 40 solar cycles. The clan started the countdown instantly. They moved Zelie into the matriarch's residence so she couldn't escape. They took her communicator, her credits, her sandals. But Zelie was different.
She didn't want to run. She wanted to defy. She appeared at our portal 3 cycles after Elder Orion's passage, somehow having slipped past the ants who were supposed to be guarding her. Her face was swollen from weeping, but her eyes burned with a fire I'd never seen in any of the other widows. She grabbed my mother's hands and squeezed them until her knuckles went stark white. Mom pulled her inside quickly, surveying the path before securing the entry. The lounge drapes were already closed. Zalie's whole frame shook as she stood in our receiving hall barefoot, because they'd confiscated her sandals to prevent her from fleeing. Her feet were bleeding from the kilometer-long trek across the city. I brought her purified water while Mom examined her. Zelie had contusions on her wrists where someone had restrained her. There were crimson marks on her throat. She kept touching her abdomen, a defensive motion that made my chest constrict. Mom made her sit down and started asking questions in a low, urgent tone. How many were monitoring the estate? Who possessed the security keys? When did they plan to begin the consecration preparations? Zelie answered everything while I dressed her feet, wincing as I cleaned the lacerations. The intelligence wasn't favorable. The matriarch had assigned shifts, 2 aunts during the daylight, 2 uncles in the dark cycle. They'd already procured the ceremonial chalice, the one with the etched blue kelp flowers that had been used for Elder Orion's first 3 wives. Cycle 40 was marked on the hearth calendar in crimson ink. They were making Zelie help plan her own passage, selecting white silks and discussing floral arrangements. Mom's face went very still as she listened. She excused herself and came back with the encrypted comm device we used for shadow network business. Her digits flew across the interface, sending coded communiques. Within minutes, responses started coming in. I recognized some of the cipher phrases. Garden needs tending meant they needed a safe haven. Recipe exchange tomorrow meant documents were ready. Bringing dessert meant someone would provide transport. But then Zelie said something that changed everything. She didn't want to flee. She didn't want a new identity in another territory. She wanted to stay and dismantle the custom from within. She wanted to save other women after her. Mom tried to explain how hazardous that was. The network operated in obscurity for a reason. Open defiance meant true termination, not the feigned kind we arranged. But Zalie's jaw was set in a way that reminded me of Mom's expression during those O3 lessons. We spent the next 2 hours strategizing. Zelie would return before they noticed her absence. She'd play along, act resigned to her hate. Meanwhile, we'd work on a different kind of escape plan. Not fleeing, but surviving in plain sight. I gave Zelie one of our disposable comms, showing her how to conceal it in the lining of her purse. Mom wrote down security words and meeting signals. We'd communicate through the other widows in the clan, the ones who came to offer solace, but were really checking if she needed aid.
Zelie laughed through the rear exit as the sun was setting. I watched her limp down the alleyway, her bandaged feet careful on the gravel. Mom was already on the comm device, activating sectors of the network we'd never utilized before. The next few cycles were tense. At clan gatherings, we had to pretend everything was normal. I served CT to the Matriarch while she discussed the consecration arrangements. She seemed content that Zelie was being so compliant, helping choose flowers and composing farewell missives. What the Matriarch didn't know was that every night Zelie was meeting with different network members. Aunt Lou's departed sister had sent detailed schematics on which compounds mimicked termination most convincingly. A cousin who worked at the tribunal was preparing duplicate death reports. Elder Han from the neighboring settlement, whose consort had passed 15 cycles ago, sent funds through a complex sequence of transfers. I spent my evenings in the computer lab, generating not just one identity for Zelie, but 3. Each had different backstories, different destinations. We were preparing for contingencies, for things going wrong. Mom made me memorize transport schedules to cities I'd never heard of. Cycle 15 arrived faster than anticipated. Zelie looked thinner when I saw her at Elder Kale's natal day dinner. The aunts kept her chalice filled with tea, observing every sip. She played her part perfectly, speaking in a soft voice about joining Elder Orion soon. The matriarch patted her hand approvingly. Under the table, Zelie pressed a folded paper into my palm. Later in the lavatory, I read her message. They'd advanced the timeline. Someone had seen her near our estate. They were suspicious. The consecration would happen on cycle 35 instead of cycle 40. We had 20 cycles instead of 25. Mom's network went into overdrive. Messages flew back and forth. I'm really curious about this whole network that's been running for 20 cycles. How did nobody notice all these departed women were actually alive somewhere else? The mom teaching her daughter sigil forgery at 0300 seems like such a specific detail. And I wonder what made her start collecting those consecration vidlogs in the first place. Safe havens were prepared, documents were rushed, but we hit an obstacle. The compounds we needed required a physician's authorization, and our usual contact had just been detained for something unrelated. We needed a new strategy. That's when Zelie surprised us again. She'd been watching, learning. She knew which aunt prepared the draught, where it was stored, how it was compounded. She had a different idea. Instead of feigning her termination with compounds, why not switch the toxins? Make it look like she consumed the real thing when it was something harmless.
It was riskier than our usual protocols. It required insider help, someone who could access the toxin storage. Mom was against it, but Zelie had already started recruiting. She'd found an ally in an unexpected place. Elder Orion's mother. The old woman was nearly 90, had survived 4 sons and watched 12 daughters-in-law pass. Zelie had been conversing with her during the long cycles of confinement, and something had shifted. Maybe it was Zelie's pregnancy, the great-grandchild who would perish with her. Maybe the old woman was simply weary of watching young women vanish. On cycle 20th, the matriarch announced that Zelie would help prepare the ceremonial draught herself to demonstrate her compliance. It was a test. They'd monitor her every action, ensure she didn't try to substitute or dilute it, but it also gave us an opening. The preparation ceremony took place in the Matriarch's kitchen on cycle 21. I watched from the archway as Zelie stood at the counter, her movements careful and deliberate. The Matriarch supervised every stage, her sharp eyes tracking each ingredient Zelie measured. The other aunts formed a semicircle around them, their presence suffocating in the small space. Zelie's hands remained steady as she ground the bitter salt root in the mortar. The sound filled the kitchen, rhythmic and final. She added each component exactly as instructed, following the formula that had ended Elder Orion's previous wives. The matriarch nodded approvingly at Zelie's precision. What the observing aunts didn't notice was Elder Orion's mother sitting quietly in the corner, her weathered hands folded in her lap. She appeared to be resting, but I saw her eyes tracking Zelie's movements, saw the slight tension in her shoulders. She was waiting. The preparation ceremony took 3 hours. Zelie bottled the mixture in a small glass ampule, sealed it with resin, and handed it to the matriarch for inspection. The matriarch held it up to the light, checking the hue and consistency. She seemed satisfied. The ampule went into the locked cabinet where all the ceremonial items were stored. That evening, Mom received a coded communique through our network. Elder Orion's mother had successfully fabricated a duplicate key to the cabinet during her cycles living in the estate. She would make the substitution on cycle 34, the night before the consecration. We had 13 cycles to create a harmless substitute that looked identical to the genuine draught. I spent the next week in my academy's chemistry lab after hours. My tutor had granted me a key for my advanced placement projects, never suspecting I was creating fake toxin. The genuine mixture had a distinctive amber hue and bitter salt root scent. I experimented with different combinations of innocuous ingredients, trying to match both appearance and aroma. Mom coordinated with other network members who had chemical expertise.
A widow in another territory, now employed as a lab technician under a false identity, sent detailed instructions through encrypted data logs. She'd assisted 3 other women in feigning their terminations using similar methods. On cycle 25, everything started falling apart. Zelie sent an emergency signal during a clan dinner. I was serving dessert when I noticed her tapping her water glass in the danger pattern we'd established. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, immediate threat. After dinner, I found her message hidden in the lavatory. Someone had seen Elder Orion's mother near the cabinet at night. They were suspicious. The matriarch had announced that the cabinet would now have 2 guards, and the key would stay on her person at all times. Mom called an emergency network convocation that night. We gathered in Elder Han's basement, 8 women who were supposed to be departed, sitting around a folding table. Each had successfully escaped the custom, but they all remembered the terror of their own countdowns. The discussion grew fervent. Some wanted to abort the strategy, get Zelie out instantly through our usual channels. Others argued we were too far along, that retreating now would expose the entire network. Mom kept trying to find a compromise, but I could see the stress on her face. Then Elder Han spoke up. She'd been silent until that moment, but her words changed everything. She revealed that she'd been documenting every consecration for the past 15 cycles, hidden recording crystals, audio logs, detailed notes. She had evidence of over 40 forced terminations, including vidlogs of women being physically restrained while the drought was administered. The room went silent. We'd all known the truth, but seeing the evidence laid out was different. Elder Han explained she'd been waiting for the precise moment, the right case to expose everything. Zelie's situation with her pregnancy and Elder Orion's mother as an insider ally might be that moment. But exposure meant peril. Real peril. Not just for Zelie, but for every woman in the network. Some had children in their new lives, careers, unions. They'd constructed entire existences on the foundation of being departed.
Exposure would destroy all of that. The convocation ended without accord. Mom and I drove home in silent tension, both lost in our own thoughts. We had 10 cycles left, and our original strategy was compromised. On cycle 28th, the matriarch made another announcement. The consecration would be public, held at the clan shrine of the deep instead of the estate. The entire extended clan would attend, over 200 individuals. She wanted to make an example of Zelie's dedication to inspire other young wives. This complicated everything. Our escape plans had relied on the disorder of a house ceremony, the ability to switch bodies in a crowded room. A shrine consecration would have formal procedures, assigned seating, multiple witnesses.
There would be nowhere to conceal. Zelie's response was unexpected. She embraced the change, telling the matriarch she was honored by the public ceremony. She volunteered to assist with preparations, to dispatch invites to coordinate with the shrine officials. The matriarch was pleased by her fervor. What the matriarch didn't know was that Zelie was building her own network within the clan. She'd identified the doubters, the ones who attended ceremonies with reluctance. Elder Orion's mother helped, pointing out which relatives had questioned the custom privately over the cycles. I watched Zelie operate during clan gatherings. She was subtle, planting seeds of doubt without seeming to. She'd mention her pregnancy symptoms to the younger aunts, let them feel the movement of the child. She'd share memories of Elder Orion with his brothers, reminding them of his severity. She never spoke against the custom directly, but her words carried weight. On cycle 30, we had a breakthrough. One of Elder Orion's nephews approached Mom at the market. He'd been assigned as one of the night sentinels, but wanted to assist. His own wife was carrying, and observing Zelie's countdown had altered something in him. He offered to be on duty the night before the consecration. Mom was wary at first. We'd learned to be cautious about unexpected allies. But the nephew proved his sincerity by disclosing that 3 other young men in the clan felt the same way. They'd been conferring privately, questioning why their wives should perish for them someday. This expanded our options. With insider help among the sentinels, we could attempt the toxin switch after all. But we needed a new strategy for the shrine ceremony itself. Even with fake toxin, Zelie would require medical attention afterward to finalize the deception. The shrine was isolated, far from any medical center. I spent cycle 31 generating Zelie's final identity documents. This time, I made her older, a widow who'd lost her consort. Naturally, the backstory was detailed: where she'd resided, what her consort did for trade, how long they'd been united. I aged her portraits, adding lines around her eyes, silver streaks in her hair. Mom coordinated with a network physician 3 territories away. She would declare Zelie departed over a secured comlink using vidlog we'd prepare in advance. The death report was already generated, awaiting for the official time of termination to be added. Everything was prepared for Zelie's new life. But Zelie was still focused on something larger. She'd been recording conversations with clan members on the disposable comm, gathering evidence of coercion. She wanted what Elder Han had offered: exposure of the custom, not just escape, but justice for all the women who hadn't made it out. On cycle 32, the matriarch increased security further. Zelie was no longer permitted to leave her chamber except for meals and ceremony preparations. 2 aunts slept in her chamber at night.
The windows were secured. They even removed the bathing chamber door to prevent privacy. Zelie adapted. She used meal times to continue her subtle campaign among the clan. She spoke about the child constantly, wondering aloud whether it would be a son or daughter, what Elder Orion would have wanted to name it. Several aunts began weeping during these conversations, though they tried to hide it. Elder Orion's mother played her part flawlessly. She grumbled about the public ceremony, complained about the voyage to the shrine, acted every bit the traditional matriarch. No one suspected she'd already made 3 duplicates of the cabinet key, or that she visited Zelie's chamber each night to check on her when the sentinels dozed. On cycle 33, the clan held a rehearsal at the shrine. Zelie walked through each step of the ceremony, practicing her final tea service, her last words to Elder Orion's spirit. She was serene, almost luminous. The nephew's switching sides because his wife is pregnant hits different when you realize he's basically looking at his own future grief and going, wait a minute, this logic doesn't hold. The matriarch praised her composure repeatedly. I attended the rehearsal as part of the clan chorus. We were supposed to chant traditional hymns during the ceremony, creating a sonic barrier that would mask any final protests. But as I watched Zelie practice drinking from an empty chalice, I noticed something. Several of the younger relatives weren't singing. They were mouthing the words, but no sound came out. That evening, the nephew who'd offered to assist confirmed what I'd suspected. The quiet rebellion was growing. At least a dozen clan members were planning to refuse participation in the ceremony. They wouldn't halt it, but they wouldn't aid either. It was a small fissure in the customs foundation. Mom spent that night finalizing escape routes. The shrine had 3 exits: the main portal, a side door near the preparation room, and an old service entrance that was supposedly sealed. Our network had scouted each one, timing distances to various safe havens. We had drivers positioned at strategic points, ready to mobilize when signaled. Cycle 34 arrived with unusual warmth. The clan buzzed with ceremony preparations. Flora arrived at the shrine, white frost blossoms for grief and crimson reef roses for love. The ceremonial chalice was cleansed and polished, its blue kelp flowers bright against the obsidian. The matriarch personally supervised every detail. Zelie spent the morning composing missives. Custom required her to leave messages for clan members, final words of counsel and affection. But Zelie wrote other missives too, concealed between the traditional ones. Letters to the daughters who would be born into the clan. Letters warning them about the custom, telling them about the network, giving them hope. That afternoon, Elder Orion's mother made her maneuver.
During the disorder of preparation, she volunteered to inspect the ceremonial items one final time. The matriarch, distracted by an issue with the floral arrangements, handed over the key without thinking. It was a moment 2 cycles in the making. The switch took less than 30 seconds. Elder Orion's mother had practiced the motion dozens of times. Out came the genuine draft. In went our substitute. The ampules were identical, down to the resin seal I'd carefully replicated. She locked the cabinet and returned the key before anyone noticed her absence. But we'd underestimated the matriarch's paranoia. That evening, she announced a final trial. Zelie would consume a small sip of the draft during the sunset prayers to demonstrate her commitment. Not enough to terminate, just enough to show willingness. The actual ceremony would still occur tomorrow, but this would silence any doubters. The clan gathered in the shrine as the sun descended. Zelie knelt before Elder Orion's portrait, the chalice in her hands. I stood with the chorus, my heart pounding.
We hadn't planned for this. A sip of genuine draft would be enough to make her violently ill, possibly enough to harm the child. Zelie raised the chalice to her lips. The shrine fell silent. Even the children seemed to hold their breath. But just as the liquid touched her lips, Elder Orion's mother collapsed. The old woman fell hard, clutching her chest. Someone screamed. The chalice slipped from Zelie's hands, shattering on the stone floor. The draft spread across the tiles, a dark stain that seemed to grow in the fading light. Chaos erupted. Clan members rushed to aid Elder Orion's mother. Someone called for a physician. The matriarch shouted for composure, but no one listened. Zelie was pushed aside in the confusion, forgotten momentarily as everyone focused on the medical emergency. Mom and I exchanged glances across the room. This wasn't part of our plan. But Elder Orion's mother, even as relatives fanned her face and checked her pulse, managed to catch my eye. The slightest wink told me everything. She'd created the perfect diversion. The medics arrived within minutes. Elder Orion's mother was loaded onto a stretcher, oxygen mask over her face. She gestured weakly for Zelie to come close. Everyone leaned in to hear her final words to her daughter-in-law. But the old woman was a better actress than any of us had guessed. She gripped Zelie's hand and pulled her down, whispering something that made Zelie's eyes go wide. Then she was wheeled away, several clan members following the transport to the medical center. The matriarch stood among the broken obsidian and spilled toxin, her face a mask of fury. The ceremony was ruined. The draft was gone. The sun had set, making it inauspicious to prepare more until morning. She ordered everyone to return home, to gather again at dawn for the delayed ceremony.
As we filed out of the shrine, I noticed something crucial. In the chaos, Zelie had disappeared. Her assigned sentinels were busy cleaning up the toxin, arguing about who was responsible for the disaster. No one had seen her slip out the service entrance, the one our network had quietly unlocked that morning. Mom and I drove home in tense silence, both of us checking our comm devices constantly. No word from Zelie, no signals from the network. Elder Orion's mother was reportedly stable at the medical center, her cardiac episode keeping half the clan occupied. But where was Zelie? The answer came at midnight, a coded communique through 3 different network channels. Zelie was secure, but she hadn't fled. She was hiding in the shrine itself, in a storage room behind the altar. Elder Orion's mother had informed her about it during their whispered exchange, a place she'd discovered decades ago. Zelie's message was clear. She would not run. Tomorrow she would appear at the ceremony as expected. She would consume from the chalice in front of everyone. But this time, the entire clan would know the truth about what they were witnessing. Mom tried to talk her out of it. The substitute toxin would make her ill, might still harm the child. The feigned termination compounds were safer, tested, but Zelie had made her decision. She wanted the clan to see her pass and then rise again. She wanted them to know that every ceremony they'd witnessed might have been a falsehood. We had less than 6 hours until dawn. The network mobilized for one final surge. Elder Han prepared her evidence for broadcast. The widows who'd escaped cycles ago made vidlogs revealing their survival. Elder Orion's mother, from her hospital bed, recorded her own testimony about the wives she'd helped terminate. I spent those hours in the computer lab, uploading everything to secure servers. We created an automated system. If Zelie didn't input a code every 12 hours, all the evidence would be sent to every clan member's email, comm device, and social network. The custom would be exposed whether the matriarch wanted it or not.
As dawn approached, I thought about all the women who hadn't made it out. Aunt Fira with her shaking hands, Aunt Lissa who'd tried to flee, Aunt Lyra who'd been caught packing. Tomorrow, Zelie would drink for all of them, and one way or another, the custom would never be the same. The sun rose on cycle 35, painting the sky the hue of blood and gold. The clan gathered once more at the shrine, subdued after yesterday's upheaval. The matriarch had spent the night preparing new toxin, sampling it herself to ensure its potency. The ceremonial chalice had been replaced, this one etched with yellow sun lilies. Zelie arrived in white silk, her hair pinned up with jade clasps that had belonged to Elder Orion's first wife.
She looked pale but resolved, her hand resting defensively on her abdomen. The sentinels flanked her closely, having been thoroughly reprimanded for losing her. The cycle before, the ceremony began with the traditional hymns. This time, even fewer voices joined in. The rebellion had expanded overnight. Clan members, disturbed by Elder Orion's mother's collapse, by Zelie's quiet dignity, by their own consciences finally awakening. Zelie served CT to each of Elder Orion's relatives, her movements fluid despite her exhaustion. Some could barely meet her eyes as they accepted the cup. Others gripped her hands, their faces twisted with an emotion they couldn't define. The matriarch watched it all with cold satisfaction. Finally, the moment arrived. The matriarch herself carried the toxin chalice to Zelie, ensuring there would be no mishaps this time. The yellow sun lilies seemed to gleam in the morning light. The shrine fell silent except for the sound of breathing and the distant cry of gulls. Zelie took the chalice with both hands. She looked around the room, meeting as many eyes as she could. Then she spoke, her voice carrying clearly through the shrine. She thanked Elder Orion for choosing her. She thanked the clan for their support. She spoke of the honor of joining her consort in the Great Deep. But then she continued speaking. She mentioned Aunt Fira, how beautiful she looked in her final moments. She recalled Aunt Lysa's devotion, attempting to flee only because she'd been confused with grief. She named every woman who had perished from a ceremonial chalice, praising their sacrifice. With each name, the clan grew more uncomfortable. These women were supposed to be remembered individually. They were supposed to blur together into a custom, a beautiful tradition. But Zelie made them real again, gave them back their faces and their histories. The matriarch cleared her throat, a caution. Zelie smiled and raised the chalice to her lips. The clan leaned forward. Some of the aunts were weeping openly now. Elder Orion's nephews stood rigid, their faces pale. Zelie consumed deeply, emptying the chalice in 3 swallows. She set it down gently and walked to the cushion placed before Elder Orion's portrait. She knelt, arranged her silk around her, and closed her eyes. Supposed to resume, but only a few voices joined in. Most of the clan watched in horrified silence as Zelie's breathing grew labored. She swayed slightly, her hand clutching her abdomen. Someone whimpered. Then Zelie collapsed forward, her body convulsing. The convulsions were violent. Nothing like the tranquil tide they'd been promised. She gasped and choked, her fingers clawing at her throat. Elder Orion's mother really committed to that feigned cardiac incident. Talk about masterful deception. The timing was flawless, too.
Right as Zelie's lips touched the chalice, like something from a classic holodrama, but with actual toxin involved, several clan members surged forward, but the matriarch held them back. This was custom. They must not interfere. The convulsions lasted 5 minutes that felt like cycles. Finally, Zelie went still. Her body lay contorted on the cushion, nothing serene or romantic about her posture. The shrine was absolutely silent. The matriarch approached slowly, checking for a pulse. She nodded once, satisfied. Zelie was departed. The vow of Aetheria had been upheld. She began issuing directives for the burial preparation. But something was wrong. The younger clan members weren't moving. They stared at Zelie's body with expressions of horror and rage. One of Elder Orion's nephews stepped forward, blocking the matriarch's path. He declared that he would not partake in the burial. His wife would never follow him into the great deep. The custom ended here with Zelie. Other voices joined his, a chorus of refusal that grew with each declaration. The matriarch's face went stark white with fury. She threatened disinheritance, exile, shame upon their lineage. But the rebellion had reached critical mass. Too many had observed Zelie's violent passage. Too many had seen the truth beneath the ceremony's beautiful falsehoods. In the midst of the shouting, no one noticed Zelie's fingers twitch. No one saw her eyelids flutter. The substitute draught was dissipating exactly as planned, her body fighting its way back to awareness. It was a child who saw it first, a little girl, perhaps 6 cycles old, who screamed and pointed. Zelie was stirring. Zelie was breathing. Zelie was alive. The shrine erupted. Some clan members fell to their knees, convinced they were witnessing a miracle of the deep. Others backed away in terror. The matriarch stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Zelie sat up slowly, her movements shaky but deliberate. She looked around the room at the shocked faces, the tears, the rage, the wonder. Then she spoke, her voice low but clear. She told them about the shadow network, about the women who'd feigned their passages, about the ones who hadn't been so fortunate. She spoke of Elder Orion's severity, his preceding wives, the lash marks hidden beneath pearl-white silks. She told them everything. Some clan members tried to exit but found the shrine door secured from the exterior. The network had planned for this too. They would all hear the truth, whether they wanted to or not. Elder Orion's mother arrived then, wheeled in by a network member disguised as a med tech. She added her testimony, confessing to assisting in the termination of 12 daughters-in-law over the cycles. She named each one, described their final moments, the way they'd pleaded for their lives. The evidence played on a display someone had set up during the chaos. Vidlogs of ceremonies, audio of women begging, documents showing coastal property transfers after each termination.
The custom's true face revealed in undeniable detail. By the time the portals were unlocked, the clan was shattered. Some wept for daughters and sisters they'd helped terminate. Others raged at the matriarch, at the custom, at themselves for participating. A few still clung to the old ways, insisting Zelie's resurrection was a trick. But the damage was done. Within hours, the narrative spread through the extended family lineage. Other branches faced their own reckoning, as widows appeared at ceremonies, very much alive. The custom that had claimed hundreds began to crumble from within. Zelie left the shrine supported by Mom and me. She was weak but triumphant, her child still safe despite everything. We drove her to a network safe haven where a physician waited to check her over. She would rest for a few cycles, then vanish into her new existence. But first, she had one more duty. That evening, she recorded a vidlog message for all the daughters who would be born into the clan. She told them they were unbound. The custom was broken. They would never have to count their consort's silver hairs or stare at carving knives or learn maritime routes to the archipelago. The aftermath of Zelie's resurrection sent shockwaves through the shrine. Clan members scattered in different directions, some rushing toward her, others backing away. I helped steady Zelie as she struggled to stand, her legs weak from the substitute drought's effects. Mom positioned herself between Zelie and the matriarch, who remained frozen near the altar. Elder Orion's mother directed operations from her mobility chair, pointing out which exits to use. The network members who'd secured the portals now opened specific routes, creating controlled chaos. Zelie leaned heavily on my shoulder as we moved toward the side entrance.
But the matriarch's voice cut through the noise. She demanded everyone halt, her authority cracking, but not yet broken. Several older uncles moved to block our path, torn between custom and what they'd just witnessed. Zelie straightened, despite her weakness, facing them directly. She placed one hand protectively over her abdomen and waited. The standoff lasted only moments. Elder Orion's nephew, the one who'd offered to assist, stepped between the uncles and Zelie. Two more young men joined him, then their wives. A human passage formed, clan members choosing sides without words. The older uncles hesitated, outnumbered and uncertain. Mom guided us through the passage while behind us, arguments erupted. The matriarch's shrill commands mixed with younger voices demanding answers. Someone mentioned summoning the constabulary, but Elder Orion's mother shut that down quickly. This was clan business, she reminded them. No outsiders.
We reached the network transport skiff, parked behind the shrine. The pilot, one of Elder Han's contacts, had the engine running. As we helped Zelie inside, I saw more clan members streaming out of the shrine. Some headed for their vehicles, others stood in small groups, gesturing wildly. The customs fracture was visible in real time. The safe haven was 40 minutes away, a nondescript dwelling above a spice shop. The network had utilized it for 3 other escapes. Zelie dozed fitfully during the drive, her color slowly returning. Mom made calls, activating the next phase of our plan. At the dwelling, a nurse was waiting. She checked Zelie's vitals, monitored the child's pulse, and started an IV for fluids. The substitute drought had done its purpose, creating dramatic symptoms without lasting harm. Zelie would need rest, but both she and the child were stable. While Zelie recovered, the network moved into high gear. Elder Han's evidence packages were being compiled, ready for distribution. The automated system I'd set up was armed and waiting. If Zelie didn't enter her code by midnight, everything would be exposed. Mom's comm device buzzed constantly with updates from clan members. The shrine gathering had dissolved into chaos. The matriarch had retreated to her estate with her most loyal supporters, but cracks were showing even there. 3 aunts had refused to assist with the burial preparations for a woman who wasn't departed. Elder Orion's brothers were arguing about property rights, suddenly uncertain if his previous wives had truly passed. Zelie woke in the early afternoon, immediately asking about the strategy. We showed her the prepared evidence, the testimonies from escaped widows, the documentation Elder Han had collected. She reviewed everything carefully, occasionally suggesting additions or corrections. The decision to release the evidence wasn't just Zelie's to make. Every woman in the network had to consent, knowing it would change their lives forever. Mom coordinated a conference link with 12 escaped widows. Some had been departed for over a decade, with new families who knew nothing of their past. The debate was intense but brief. The vote was unanimous. They were weary of hiding, weary of knowing other women were still perishing. The evidence would be released, but strategically, not to law enforcement or media, but to every clan member under 40. Let the younger generation decide what to do with the truth. I spent the afternoon fine-tuning the distribution system, email coordinates, comm device numbers, social media profiles. We had been collecting contact information for cycles. The packages would go out simultaneously, impossible to stop once started. Each one contained vidlogs, documents, and a simple message.
The custom is a fabrication. Your aunts, sisters, and daughters may still be alive. As evening approached, Zelie made a decision that surprised us all. She wanted to send one last message to the matriarch before vanishing. Not a confrontation, but a simple photo of herself holding her sonogram image. Proof that both she and the child had survived. Mom argued against it, worried about giving the matriarch any clue to track Zelie, but Zelie insisted. She wanted the matriarch to know that her control was broken, that the custom had failed. We compromised by routing the message through multiple anonymous servers, impossible to trace back. The photo was simple but powerful. Zelie, still pale but clearly alive, cradling the sonogram, showing her healthy child. No words were needed. The image itself was a declaration of victory. At 11:47 p.m., Zelie entered the code to stop the automatic release. Then, at exactly midnight, she entered a different code. The evidence packages began sending immediately. Across 3 territories, comm devices buzzed and computers chimed as clan members received the truth about their departed relatives. The network had prepared for various reactions, but the reality exceeded expectations. Within an hour, Mom's comm device was flooded with calls from clan members. Some were enraged, accusing us of lies and trickery. Others were desperate, asking about specific relatives, hoping their loved ones might still be alive. The most surprising calls came from the middle generation, people in their 40s and 50s who'd grown up with the custom but hadn't yet faced it personally. Many had suspected something, had noticed inconsistencies over the cycles. The evidence confirmed their doubts and gave them permission to act. By dawn, the clan was an open revolt. Why does the matriarch just stand there frozen when Zelie sits up? A woman who's controlled this custom for decades doesn't have a contingency plan? The timing feels too perfect. The child screams right when Zelie starts moving. The portals secure exactly when needed. And Elder Orion's mother rolls in like she's been waiting backstage this whole time. The matriarch's estate, once the nexus of power, became a site of confrontation. Daughters demanded answers about their mothers. Sons questioned their fathers' ascensions and the wives who'd followed. The custom's careful structure collapsed under the weight of revealed truths. Zelie watched the updates from the safe haven, her expression mixing satisfaction with sadness. Not every woman had escaped. The evidence included confirmation of genuine terminations, women who'd been caught trying to flee or who'd never found the network in time. For every successful escape, there were others who hadn't made it. The nurse cleared Zelie to travel on cycle 36. Her new identity was ready.
Documents flawless, down to the smallest detail. She would be Catherine Henley, a widow from Calyx, moving to start anew. The backstory was solid, the paper trail complete. Even her social media history had been carefully crafted over months. Mom and I drove Zelie to the transport hub. She wore a wig that changed her appearance dramatically, colored contacts altering her distinctive eyes. In her purse were 3,000 Chronos cash, a prepaid comm device, and the contact information for network members in her destination city. The farewell was brief by necessity. Long goodbyes attracted notice. Zelie hugged us both, whispering thanks that didn't begin to cover what we'd all risked. Then she boarded the skiff. Just another traveler heading somewhere new. I watched until the skiff disappeared around a bend, carrying Zelie toward her new life. Mom drove us home in silence, both of us processing the magnitude of what had happened. The custom was broken, at least in our clan branch, but the work wasn't over. The following cycles brought a cascade of revelations. Elder Orion's mother, fully recovered from her feigned cardiac incident, became an unexpected leader in the clan reformation. She used her age and status to shield younger clan members who spoke out against the custom. When the matriarch tried to reassert control, she found her influence had evaporated. Some clan members clung to the old ways, insisting the evidence was fabricated. They held smaller ceremonies, trying to continue the custom, but without unanimous clan support. These attempts felt hollow. Young wives refused to participate. Husbands faced questions from their children about why mother should have to perish if father got ill. The network adapted to its new reality. Some women chose to reveal themselves, reuniting with children they'd left behind. Others maintained their new identities, building on the lives they'd created. The safe havens remained active, now helping women from other clan branches who'd heard whispers of escape. Elder Han's evidence collection became a template for documenting other harmful customs. Women from different communities reached out, sharing their own histories of forced ceremonies and inherited oppression. The network expanded, connecting survivors across cultural lines. I returned to the academy, but everything felt different. My holographic design skills, honed creating fake identities, earned me acclaim from tutors who had no idea how I'd really developed them. University applications asked about adversities I'd overcome, and I composed essays that skirted the truth. Mom continued coordinating the network, but openly now. She helped reunite families, facilitated difficult dialogues, and provided resources for women still trapped in perilous situations.
Our home became a staging point for women in transition, a place to rest between their old existences and new ones. 3 months after Zelie escape, we received a package with no return coordinates. Inside was a photo of a baby girl, healthy and perfect. On the back, in Zelie's handwriting, "She's unbound." No signature was needed. We added the photo to our collection. Another life saved from the custom. The clan gatherings changed drastically. Without the shadow of the widow ceremony, relationships shifted. Couples talked more openly about mortality and choice. Some unions ended when women realized they'd stayed out of fear rather than affection. Others grew stronger, built on mutual respect rather than ownership. The matriarch isolated herself, surrounded by the few relatives who still believed in the old ways. Her estate, once the epicenter of clan power, became a mausoleum to a dying custom. Younger clan members visited out of obligation, but her influence was gone. The fear that had sustained her authority had evaporated with Zelie's resurrection. On the first anniversary of Zelie's escape, the network held a quiet commemoration. 14 women, who were supposed to be departed, gathered in Elder Han's basement. They shared stories, compared new existences, and remembered those who hadn't made it. Zelie didn't attend. It was still too dangerous, but she sent a vidbog message. In it, she thanked everyone who'd helped her escape. She showed glimpses of her new life, a small apartment, a trade at a local archive, her daughter taking first steps. She looked different. Older, wearing optical aids, her hair a different pigment, but her eyes held the same resolve that had carried her through those 40 cycles. The custom didn't cease overnight. Other clan branches continued the ceremonies, and women still perished, but word spread through whispered conversations and careful messages. The network grew, reaching women we'd never imagined we could assist. Each escape built on the last, refining methods and expanding possibilities. I graduated from the academy with distinction, my university applications strengthened by a portfolio of design work that showcased technical skills beyond my years. Tutors wrote recommendation letters praising my dedication and creativity, never knowing they were commending abilities developed in life or death situations. The summer before university, I created my last synthetic identity, not for an escaping widow, but for a young woman from another family who'd heard about our network. Her consort was passing from a wasting disease, and his family had already started discussing ceremony preparations. We gave her a new alias, a new life, and a chance to grieve without perishing for it. As I packed for university, I found the photo Zelie had sent of her daughter.
The child's eyes were bright and curious, looking at a world where she'd never have to count anyone's silver hairs or memorize maritime routes to the archipelago. She was unbound from the moment of her birth, the customs chain broken before it could bind her. Mom drove me to campus, the vehicle loaded with normal university supplies that felt strange after cycles of secret comm devices and replicated documents. We didn't discuss the network during the drive, but I knew she'd continue the work. There were always more women who needed aid, more traditions that demanded resistance. At the dormitory, surrounded by other freshmen worried about classes and roommates, I felt the weight of secrets that would never fully leave me, but also pride. We had saved lives, exposed lies, and broken a custom that had terminated for generations. Not completely, not everywhere, but enough to matter. That night I got a text from an unknown number. Just 2 words. Thank you. I knew it was Zelie, reaching out one last time before severing the final connection to her old life. I deleted the message immediately, protecting her security, as we'd always done. University opened new horizons, but I carried the lessons of those years with me. In sociology classes discussing cultural practices, I understood the weight of inherited rituals. In ethics debates about clan loyalty versus individual rights, I knew the real cost of choosing sides. In women's studies, courses examining systemic oppression, I recognized patterns I'd experienced. The network evolved without my daily involvement. Younger women took over the technical aspects, creating more sophisticated systems for documentation and escape. The evidence Elder Han had collected became part of academic studies on harmful cultural practices. Scholars cited our work without knowing the full history of how it was gathered. 5 cycles later, at my university graduation, I saw a familiar face in the crowd, one of the aunts we'd helped escape, living openly now under her real alias. She'd reclaimed her life after a decade of concealment, reuniting with her children and building new relationships. She smiled at me across the crowd, a silent acknowledgement of shared history. The custom still existed in pockets, but its power was broken. Too many people knew the truth. Too many women had survived to tell their stories. What had once been a source of pride for lineages like ours became a mark of shame, a reminder of generations of needless termination. I started graduate school in social work, driven by the knowledge that there were other customs, other families, other women who needed what our network had provided. The skills I'd learned creating fake identities translated into helping people navigate legal systems and bureaucracies.
The connections I'd made became resources for those seeking escape from different kinds of oppression. Mom aged gracefully, her hands steady now when she braided her hair. The fear that had haunted her union disappeared, replaced by a partnership built on equality. Dad, freed from the burden of knowing his passage would mean Mom's too, became more present in their relationship. They traveled, something Mom had never dared dream of before. On quiet evenings, I sometimes thought about all the women whose aliases we'd changed, whose deaths we'd feigned, whose lives we'd saved. Each one was living proof that traditions could be broken, that inherited cruelty wasn't inevitable. They were tutors and apothecaries, mothers and daughters, all existing in defiance of a practice that had tried to erase them. The network's work continued, expanding beyond our clan to help women trapped in different but equally deadly customs. We shared resources, strategies, and hope, with groups fighting forced marriages, honor rulings, and other practices that treated women as property rather than people. Sending a child photo with "She's Unbound" written on the back is peak escaped widow defiance. Nothing says, "I'm alive and thriving," quite like proof you made a whole new person while supposedly being departed. Each success built on the last, creating ripples of change. Zelie's daughter would be 7 now, the same age I was when I watched Aunt Fira pass, but she would never witness such a ceremony. For her, the custom would be nothing more than a strange story from the past, a reminder of how things used to be before her mother's courage changed everything. The work wasn't finished. It might never be completely done, but every woman who walked free instead of consuming the draught, every daughter who grew up without fearing her consort's mortality, every family that chose affection over tradition was a victory. We had proven that inherited cruelty could be stopped, that networks of care could overcome systems of control. As I prepared for my first day as a licensed social worker, I kept a photo on my desk. Zelie holding her sonogram, alive and defiant. A reminder that sometimes the greatest rebellion is simply refusing to pass when custom demands it. Her survival had sparked a revolution that saved countless lives. The custom that had defined my childhood was broken, not through grand displays or public campaigns, but through quiet resistance and careful planning. Through women helping women, through secrets shared in coded phrases, through the patient work of creating new possibilities. We had inherited termination and chosen life instead.
The vow of Aetheria is broken, but the fight for freedom continues. Tell me in the comments, what family tradition would you risk everything to change? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to follow the next chapter of the Shadow Network.